Our guest on today's show is documentary filmmaker James Fox, who is well known for his in-depth UFO investigations and documenting his research in a number of highly acclaimed video presentations, such as I Know What I Saw, Out of the Blue, and his latest creation, The Phenomenon. The Phenomenon has received widespread critical acclaim and has been viewed by many in Washington, D.C., being considered as an instrumental force in the pushing for UFO disclosure. Hi, James Fox. Thank you so much for joining me today on Debriefed Dig Deeper.
Hey, a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show, Christina.
So I want to start with getting your take on the current state of UFO disclosure, given all the attention the subject is given in the mainstream media.
Well, I remember back in 2008, 2007, 2008, and I was producing a film called I Know What I Saw. And there were major efforts happening both in England and France and in other countries for the push for transparency and the release of previously classified government documents. Happened in England, happened in France, not as much in the US, but other countries as well. I think Peru and Brazil. And it was very exciting because things were being released. The issue was being addressed, being talked about. I had just done that big event at the National Press Club with my partner at the time, Leslie Kane. And I was in London doing some follow-up interviews with Nick Pope in front of the Parliament. And I think Nick still was loosely connected with the MOD at the time. I'm pretty sure he was. And I said, Nick, do you anticipate any type of government disclosure? And I hate to use the word disclosure, it's got a lot of baggage, but any kind of, official acknowledgement of the phenomenon. And he said, James, think of it as disclosure with a small d. And I always remember him saying that. Now, here I am, just wrapped up this other film, The Phenomenon. And I would have never in a million years, having been 4.5 years into production, anticipated that, a secret Pentagon UFO program would wind up on the front page of the New York Times in December of 2017. I mean, that changed everything. Yeah. And I don't think they could put the genie back in the bottle. The acknowledgement of the videos, the acknowledgement of, identifying that these are truly unidentified objects, exhibiting flight characteristics that defy the physics as we understand it. Those are pretty bold statements. And so they can't go backwards. So I'm seeing we're living in unprecedented times. Do I anticipate that President Biden tomorrow will make a big announcement? No. Do I anticipate that additional information is going to keep coming out? Really credible statements from high-level government officials? Yes, I do. And I think now's not the time to let up. I think we need to keep the pressure on. And that's why we started the UAP Act Now site, to amplify people's voices and make it easy for people to contact their representatives and keep the pressure on.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that website, and can you tell us about what you're doing exactly and how others can get involved in it?
Yes. First of all, I hope everyone's okay with me. Look, I've got a sunshade. I'm outside because doing an interview this morning inside my my office wasn't an option. So I'll leave it at that. So I'm doing it outside. Hopefully you guys can see me okay. But yeah, let me talk about the UAP Act Now site. If you watch the film came out in October of last year. We had a call to action in the film. I had a cruder form, but a less refined form of call to action on our site, thephenomenonfilm.com. When the 180-day deadline thing happened, and that's when then President Trump signed the COVID relief bill, it triggered a 180-day countdown for intelligence agencies to provide Congress with a public report, an assessment of, what do we know about UAPs, UFOs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. And so I was talking with both Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo and a handful of others, and I said, gosh, I've had a call to action on my film for some time. And since it came out, let's do a more focused campaign. And let me ask you guys, can you help me put something together? Make sure the language is right. Make sure that the template for the language is right. Make sure the information is accurate. And so they helped me put together this UAP Act Now site to make it really easy to contact your representative, as well as the language to use. We provide a template and explain why it's important, why it's unprecedented, and why people should get involved.
Wow. Can you tell us about your reaction you have received from members of the former or present administration, Congress, or the military that have viewed your latest video production, The Phenomenon?
Well, that's one thing that, I'll remind your audience, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but this is my 4th and a half film. And I say that because I did 2 versions of Out of the Blue over a 27-year period. And I've never, there's 2 things distinctly different about this production, this film, The Phenomenon. One is the first time I've delved into, touched on, covered close encounters of the third kind. And I'm sure that your audience knows what that is, but Dr. Hynek, who was a scientific advisor to Project Blue Book for the Air Force, the investigatory arm of UFOs from 47 to 69, categorized UFO sightings in 3 categories: close encounters of the first kind, people see a UFO; close encounter of the second kind, you see a UFO and somehow the UFO interacts with the environment, whether it leaves marks on the ground or burns someone's face, photographed, radar. Close encounter of the third kind is when witnesses report beings associated with the craft. And that's a fairly slippery slope, as you can imagine. And it's the first film that I feature cases, credible cases, mind you, of alleged close encounters of the third kind. And to my absolute amazement, not only did we get a level of endorsement, public endorsement, from recognizable household names like Senator Harry Reid, but they didn't. I was expecting they might look at the film and say, take me out. I really was. I was terrified. I remember having sleepless nights over it. I mean, think about it. I'm having Senator Harry Reid and Podesta and these intelligence people, Christopher Mellon, in a documentary that reports on a landing case in Africa where the occupants got out the craft and made telepathic communication with a handful of children at a school in broad daylight. I mean, that's a pretty out there claim. I mean, I'm not expecting people to believe it just based on that. But so anyway, so it's the first time I've seen the level of public endorsement, involvement, and dealing with close encounters of the third kind.
Wow.
I mean, it's one thing to talk about an unidentified craft in the air. It's another thing to talk about beings on the ground.
Absolutely. And having that such close encounter where they could actually describe what they were seeing. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
And so many witnesses.
Hands, arm's length, some of them.
Can you tell us what was the trigger that set you on the path of pursuing the truth about UFOs?
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I'll ever know the truth about UFOs. It's funny. It's like all these years later, and I've been around the world and I've talked with high-level military, government, civilian witnesses. And I'm only sure of one thing, and that is that, these things are under intelligent control. I mean, they're here, but who they are and where they come from and what they want, it's just as much of a mystery to me today as it was 27 years ago. And I see, people making these claims that, they come from here or there. And I just think, I don't think so. I think anyone who says they've got the answers doesn't have the answers.
So
That's just me.
So what do you think? Where do you think they come from?
I have
What do
no
you think
idea.
they are?
I have absolutely no idea.
No
Really
no
don't.
speculations?
I if I had to guess, and it would be a guess, I would say interdimensional. If I had to guess.
I like it.
Yeah.
Like
But again, I don't know. And I could be totally wrong. I mean,
So
I wish I could make more definitive statements, but I just can't.
So all these years later, you're not slowing down at all, as opposed to when you first started. Why do you do what you do now? What is it that drives you forward to search for the truth?
Well, I feel that it's an extremely important story, and something that could touch the lives of every man, woman, and child on the planet. I really do, and I've said this since I started, that I felt it would have particularly now, a very unifying effect on humanity, and and that we're all entitled to it, even if it's a little scary. There's elements of that we don't know. I remember Senator Reid saying, "Look, just because we don't understand something, it doesn't mean we should block it out or run away or deny. We should embrace and study it and put resources and figure it out." And that's how I feel. I also feel that it would we would see ourselves for who we really are, and that's one race and one planet. And I believe that just as firmly today as I did 27 years ago. And it's a difficult story to walk away from, if you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
And it is coming out now. I mean, it's what's happened in the last 4 years. I can gauge these things because I've had people. First of all, I have family scattered all around the world, and I've been heckled and laughed at and made fun of for 2 decades. I mean, seriously. And when less so when they saw the movie. A lot of times people will criticize me before they even see my work, and that's not happening anymore. In fact, I can't think of anyone who's heckled me or made fun of me or questioned anything that I'm doing now. And that changed significantly in December of 2017. Everything changed. It was the level of authenticity, the level of acknowledgement coming from that high level. The Pentagon admitting that there was a secret Pentagon UFO program. Look, they're not going to put a bunch of resources towards something if it doesn't exist, you know what I mean? And then acknowledging the gun cam footage, the FLIR footage from the fighter jets. That's a big deal. Like I said, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's out. These things are real, and people are talking about it, and people want answers. And I'm sure that the intelligence agencies are scrambling right now. I'm sure of it. What are we going to say? You can't admit what you know without exposing vulnerabilities, right? I mean, if you've got unknowns whizzing around with impunity, flying rings around our fastest jets, and we don't know who they are, where they come from, or what they want, boy, it's a kind of a tricky. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? But there's enough people on the inside that want this out, and I know that the phenomenon has definitely been helping. I mean, I've heard it's made the rounds in Washington at the Pentagon and members of the House and Senate, and it's getting attention.
James, I'm going to show a clip that wasn't shared in any of your latest interviews. It concerns the case in Montana.
I was the chief of party. I was the observer. Basically, what I was doing was the star observation to provide precise latitude and longitude. On our small 3-man team, came from the north and stopped right over us. And it had a white light from the center looking down into the silo. I just said to myself, what if this thing beams us up and takes us off to some distant place and never return to Earth again? I mean, this is going through my head here while this thing's above me. And then from this dead stop, It shoots off to the east. It's just like, now you see it, now you don't. It just...
The strike team that went out claimed that they saw something. How did they describe that? He just said a large round object directly over the LF. Directly over the site.
Lieutenant Salas was stationed in his underground launch control capsule when he received a frantic call from one of his topside guards.
Screaming into the phone saying they're looking a red glowing object hovering just above our front gate. Our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled.
Channel 11.
In fact, 10 missiles began going offline in a matter of seconds, one after the other.
Personally, I'm never aware of any 2 missiles going down at the same time, let alone 10.
To me, it's pretty clear. This is just, we're shining a light on this, we're pointing it out. What are you people doing with nuclear weapons?
You know, what amazes me is the caliber of the witnesses and the seriousness of what was being seen to be happening. What are your thoughts and conclusions?
Well, there are no more serious military men than those responsible for the security and deployment of nuclear weapons. The level of training and seriousness. I hung out with a launch control officer, a handful of military guys that were either responsible for the deployment or the security of nuclear weapons. They're very serious, and they have to be. And when you have officer after officer after officer after officer testifying, is it not only that these unknowns, these UAPs, are flying over extremely sensitive nuclear weapons facilities, but in some instances actually shutting these weapons off, and in rare circumstances activating them? That's kind of a big deal. I mean, that if that's not a national security issue, I don't know what is. Yeah. And it's funny because I remember, I've mentioned this a couple times, but in a very organic way, we were in the edit room for 3.5 years with the phenomenon, and a good associate and fellow editor, this guy Lance Mungia, he suggested getting a map when we were covering all these archival interviews, and we had archival footage that we got from this guy David Marler, Marler Archives, and stuff that we were featuring in the film to kind of build our case. And he's like, we should get a map, and we should like put a pin on the map, and we could see where all these are happening visually. I thought that's a good idea, so we did. Socorro and Holloman, White Sands, and we started putting the pin in the map, and we're going, well, gosh, Texas, New Mexico, this part. And then we're looking, and it's like, well, where's Trinity Site? Well, Trinity Site is right here. And then all these sightings over several decades all around. Proximity to the first location where we detonated in 1945, the first atomic bomb at Trinity Site. So we were like, there must be a connection with, even Roswell. Like, it's all right around the hub of, where we're doing all this activity, this atomic activity. And we took note. And then when I sat down with Senator Reid, probably a year or so later, I asked him what was one of the more astonishing aspects that they uncovered during this Pentagon UFO program. And without hesitation, he was like, the fact that these incursions are happening over these super sensitive nuclear weapons facilities, but in some instances they're shutting them off. They're interacting with us. And some of the military guys that I'd spoken with, and Robert Hastings has worked with, he's the leading guy on understanding UFOs and nukes. They were like, seems pretty clear, the message, like, either we shouldn't be messing around with these weapons or taking matches out of the hands of a baby. I mean, that's a pretty astonishing aspect. And when you listen to and that was an aspect of the film that we that was an afterthought. We were not going to cover to the extent which we did the UFOs and nukes aspect of it. But that's a pretty astonishing, everybody who watches it's like, oh my God, like this is incredible. And it is. It's kind of sending a message, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is, absolutely. I also want to get your thoughts on a specific case featured in the phenomenon, the Zimbabwe case. Let's roll the clip.
Dozens of children said that one or more of the disc-shaped objects landed just beyond the far edge of their playground. The next thing they knew, something was standing next to it.
We saw him standing by the silver thing, and he had big eyes.
He had a big head and big black eyes and was dressed in a black bodysuit.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something. It was something to do with the environment.
I kept getting these thoughts and ideas in my mind of technology. Technology is not helping, technology is bad.
I believe that the children did see something.
I believe them because normally children don't lie.
And if you saw him again, what would you do?
I'll ask him what is he doing on Earth and what does he want with us.
What strikes me most about this case is the consistency of the stories over the years. I mean, this obviously impressed you enough to report on it. What stands out the most about this case in your mind?
Well, I don't think that the average Joe would believe that landing and contact case took place had they not watched the first half of the film. Like the first half of the film is there primarily to establish a level of credibility and likelihood of that second half occurring. And I say that because in 1994 at a school in Rua, Zimbabwe, and Rua is about 30 minutes outside of the capital, Harare. There were sightings throughout the whole area within several hundred miles in every direction of UFOs, probably 2, 3, 4 nights leading up to a landing that happened at a school, aerial school. And the occupants reportedly got out probably roughly 10:30 in the morning and relayed telepathic messages to the student. And people think there were 66 kids out there in the field. There were roughly 100 kids out in the field. Now, not every single one of them had telepathic communication. That occurred with proximity to the beings and eye contact. And the message basically was becoming better stewards of the environment, being mindful of technology and these types of things. And it's a truly, if you hear about it, you're much less inclined to believe that incident actually happened. But when you see the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony in broad daylight, all saying the same thing, some people say they saw 2 beings, some it was just one, several craft, but everyone was in a different location in the playground. But that case is by far and beyond a shadow of doubt the most compelling close encounter of the third kind case in modern history, period. And I think hearing from the children then, because the Harvard psychiatrist John Mack flew out with a camera crew right after it happened, and then tracking them down and talking to them 20 years later and hearing them say the same thing, and having had that time to reflect and think about what they experienced and articulate what they experienced. And some of them didn't even share it with their partners.
And have you done any research into the trans-medium objects that are being seen? Any cases of underwater objects, aka USOs, that you've seen or looked into?
So I'm not sure if this ended up in my film Out of the Blue or not, but I did interview a guy who was in a submarine this was 20 years ago, and he was telling me about these underwater devices that they were picking up on radar and tracking them, these unknowns. So I'd heard about it quite some time ago. I'd heard about cases in, oh God, I think it was up in Canada or Alaska. Can't think of the name of the case, the particular case right now. But yes, I have heard about these when I was interviewing David Fravor, and he was talking about this alleged object that appeared to be just below the surface. And I talked with military witnesses and heard accounts, but I don't know. I can't speak with authority on that aspect of the phenomenon.
And creating all of these documentaries, hearing stories, meeting witnesses, how has it changed your perspective on life?
Well, I walk around thinking, I can't believe this is happening, and the vast majority of people around me have no idea about it. That's weird. It's like seeing something, knowing definitively that it's real and it would affect the lives of every man, woman, and child on the planet, and that probably everyone would agree, if they could suspend judgment and imagine hypothetically it was happening, that it would be the most significant discovery. That's kind of strange. It changes your perspective on things, right? You walk around with this like little secret. It's not much of a secret these days, but it's you know, I had an adjustment period. I remember I went down to South America, and I covered an alleged crash case that happened in 1996 in Varginha, and I was knocking on doors for several weeks, meeting with witnesses, both military, civilian, and people that came in within a few feet of these beings that were alive in broad daylight. And when I came home after spending I went there 3 times. When I came home, I had to be honest with you, it was a bit of an adjustment period. That story was so explosive and so not known, quite honestly. I mean, even people in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, they'd heard about it, but didn't believe it. The vast majority. And it's just weird. It's weird walking around with that information, knowing that this story is probably true and stories like it, and that people are just totally oblivious to it. And it's not their fault. But it is kind of strange walking around, knowing the kind of things that you know, and I can only imagine what it must be like for Lou Elizondo and Chris Llewellyn, right? Who knows what they know?
Your first film, 50 Years of Denial, came out in 1997. That was a time where the UFO subject was still largely taboo. How did your family and friends react to you creating this first film?
Thought I was nuts. Like literally thought I was nuts. Pretty much everybody. Yeah. And I remember one time I used to live on a houseboat in the 90s, and it was a beautiful boat. It was a friend of mine, one of my best friend's mother bought it back in the 70s, and she let us stay there. It was people go, oh, you lived on a houseboat and you edited a movie on a houseboat? I was like, no, this is actually a sophisticated, civilized 3-story house floating on a cement barge. It was nothing like, you know, all rickety, you know, tippy. No, this was a house floating on a barge. It was amazing. And there was a next door neighbor. I kind of think of those guys that, like, you know, Harvard kind of, you know, I don't know. He was very wealthy, very successful, you know, athletic, handsome. He's one of those Ivy League kind of guys. Not that I have anything against it or anything, but I just remember, and he goes, oh, I bumped into him on the dock one time, and he goes, this is just like what I dealt with all the time. He goes, oh, you're that UFO guy. And I was like, yeah. He goes, you don't actually believe in any of that shit, do you? And I was just like so offended by it. I just said, oh, God, no, of course not. I do it for the money. Of course, at the time, I probably had like $5 in my bank account. He goes, oh, good. Yeah, okay, good. That makes me feel better. And off he went. But that was the attitude for the most part. Not with everybody, but even my own family kind of, you know, my dad, for sure. But that, you know, it took probably a couple of decades for that to wane. And of course, you know, once I produced a couple of films on it, I think they started to realize there was more to it than swamp gas and misidentified aircraft and weather balloons. So that helped. And like I said, after 2017, everything changed.
And the latest video production, The Phenomenon, how do you feel about it?
Well, you have, when you embark on a project, it's like whether you're building a house or making your dream project car or restoring, whatever it is, whatever the project that you conceive, you kind of have an idea in your mind of what it is you want to create, right? You have this vision of something. And my phone just dinged off. Sorry about that. And probably the first 3 attempts, in fact, not probably, definitely, I wasn't happy with the end result. Well, I was moderately happy. I mean, okay, I got it done, and that's great. But it wasn't what I had envisioned. It didn't meet the mark. And I remember having this conversation with my father. He was rather proud of me towards the end of his life. I finished I Know What I Saw, and Lionsgate was going to buy it. Lionsgate got amazing global footprint for distribution, and it would have been amazing. Boy, I was really excited about that. And it wasn't just the financial, aspect of it, which would have been great. But, like I said, like the stamp of authenticity and legitimacy coming from Lionsgate, it was very exciting. But at the end of the day, they took a pass at the last minute because of the production qualities, and the narrative wasn't quite as strong. So I said to myself at the time, because you're exhausted at the end of making one of these films, I can't even to describe the level of exhaustion. Your audience's eyes would glaze over. It doesn't matter, but you're about as spent as you could possibly be, and you're usually about as broke as you could possibly be. And you've pushed and pushed and pushed. It's like running a marathon, and you could see the finishing line, but trying to get there, it's almost like an oasis. You keep running, and yet it doesn't come. And you keep running. It's pretty intense, really intense. And but I did say to myself at the time, if I ever had it in me to do another film, and I've learned never to say never because I've said that many times, that I wouldn't make the same mistakes as I made with my previous productions. If I couldn't afford to do it right, I'd wait. If I couldn't afford to pay for a proper photographer and audio and lighting, I would wait. And I did. And could we have gotten The Phenomenon done quicker? Probably, of course. But think of all the things that happened during that 7.5-year window. Think of, I spent 5 years on Socorro, not every day, but, getting to know the family, the Rua Zimbabwe case, just putting that stuff together. It's a long process. And then getting the people to come back together and making all that happen and raising the funds. It's not easy. These things take time. But when I finished The Phenomenon, I've only watched it once since I finished it, and I didn't watch it after the color correction. I watched it before that. I had a little tear in my eye, and I said to myself, I did it. I'm happy with this one. Yeah.
And what's the most compelling or chilling thing you've learned about doing The Phenomenon? What keeps you up at night in relation to this mystery?
Nothing really. I mean, I remember, I got to be honest with you, when I was editing the Rua Zimbabwe stuff, I combed through hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of material. I had this guy helping me at the time, Walter Murch Jr. His father's a famous film editor. He did The English Patient, Apocalypse Now. And he was like, God, there's so much stuff here. There's so much stuff here. God, how are we going to get, there's so much stuff here. How much time do you have again? 10 minutes? There's so much stuff here. I said, I know. And a lot of times I would edit late at night, and listening to the testimony of the children describing the contact with the beings, that put me closer to the beings than I'd ever been. It was just through them, right? So it was just one person away from having direct contact with alleged direct contact with the beings. And there were times where I came out under the night sky, and I was like, oh, I had a weird feeling You know, I'd step out on this deck right here, and I felt a connection. I felt that I was close. It was weird. It's a weird feeling. I've never had that before, but I was close to the intelligence, right? I could feel it, and I could pick up on it, and I could almost feel like the intelligence could pick up on me. The fact that I was picking up on it. It's weird. I don't know how to describe it, but that was as close as I've gotten to the phenomenon, was editing that segment. And I spent probably a year and a half editing that 10-minute segment, and probably 5 years all in all putting it together, getting all the different interviews and stuff. You know, because I went to Africa, and on top of, and these things take time. You know, you don't just go to Africa. You got to schedule it and let everybody know you're coming, and find the witnesses and make preparations to do shooting at the school, and these things take time. And so probably, that was that. It wasn't a scary feeling, but it was like, wow, this is intense.
And you filmed a lot of kids during that production with the Zimbabwe case. So for young people like that, and people in my generation, college kids, and others just coming to learn of this mystery, and what do you do more to find out about it and getting involved in their own research or making their own documentaries? What advice do you have for them?
The technology has gotten to a place where I'll compare it to when I first started in my 20s. I was editing tape to tape. It wasn't nonlinear editing unless you were a gazillionaire. And so the level of access has increased significantly. As a result of that, you're seeing a lot more competition. But it, you know, for probably under $5,000, you can have a studio and a camera, you know, maybe a little bit more of an investment. I don't know, not much compared to how it was. And you could produce your own content. People think, oh, I'm going to make a doc and I'm just going to pick up a camera and I'll go shoot. And there's a lot of editing that goes on in it, a lot of writing. And it's like putting together a very complex jigsaw puzzle. And it takes time, and you can't rush it. I mean, you can rush it, but it'll show. Every word of the phenomenon was carefully crafted. I mean, every single word. And we would go back and forth on one word for maybe sometimes a day, and then go back and forth and cut segments out and add segments in. Just, know that the process is hard. It's time consuming, and understand that, and don't look up. Just stay focused, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, and you will get through it. That perseverance pays off. And it's not easy. I used to say in the studio, I was like, if it were easy, this would have been done already. And it was a reminder to myself and a reminder to those around me that this is not easy. I'm never doing historical perspective ever again, ever. I mean, I might do cases, dating back thousands of years on cave paintings or something. But in terms of like the modern day UFO wave, I'll never do that again. I did it with Out of the Blue. I did the second version of Out of the Blue. I did it with 50 Years of Denial. I did it with I Know What I Saw, and I did it with the phenomenon. I'm done with that. I don't, and it makes me tremendously relieved. And I've even had some criticism. Oh, it's the same rehash, historical. I'm like, well, I can't change the history. I can't change some of the more salient aspects of the historical stuff that took place. That's history. Cover it with some new material, some new archive material. But I had to do that if I was going to, penetrate a much more mainstream audience and introduce a case of contact. I mean, there's no way anyone would have believed that Rua happened had we not done the build up to it. I'm sorry, but they just wouldn't. I didn't believe it. So I hope I'm not rambling, but I would say just don't listen to what other people say and stay focused and persevere and work your butt off.
And so what's next for you?
Work my butt off.
Doing what?
So there's some stuff that ended up on the edit room floor that I need to sweep up and put out, probably in a fairly timely fashion, as well as I can hint that I don't know how much I can reveal here, but I think there's a high probability that I will be teaming up with some fairly high profile people in the field and producing high caliber content, but on a much bigger scale.
That sounds really exciting.
Well, you want to kind of put your feet up and enjoy the fruits of your hard labor, but you also recognize that you only have the spotlight on you, for a short period of time. It's all fleeting, right? And so you want to take advantage of that and continue the momentum and the progress. And so it's no time to relax right now. And the UAP Act now is I'm investing lots of a significant amount of personal backing into that, because it means a lot to me. And I think that our voices can and will be heard. And I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for people to do it. It doesn't cost anything. UAP Act now, and spread the word.
Thank you so much, James Fox, for joining me today at Debrief Dig Deeper.
Thanks for having me. I had a good time.